Good evening, I'm John Yang. Jeff Bennett and Amna Vaz are away. On the NewsHour tonight, protests erupt across Israel demanding an end to the war after the bodies of 6 hostages held by Hamas were recovered from Gaza.
We have a prime minister who doesn't think of the good of the country but only of his own good.
On this Labor Day, we look at the power union workers could wield in the upcoming election. And Tamara Keith and Amy Walter break down the latest headlines from the campaign trail.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions, and friends of the NewsHour, including Leonard and Norma Chlorfine and the Judy and Peter Bloom Kovler Foundation.
2 retiring executives turn their focus to greyhounds, giving these former race dogs a real chance to win. A Raymond James financial advisor gets to know you, your purpose, and the way you give back. Life well planned.
The William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, for more than 50 years advancing ideas and supporting institutions to promote a better world at hewlett.org. And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said today that he would not join in ceasefire talks over his demand that Israel remain in control of Gaza's border with Egypt. He spoke after thousands of workers across Israel walked off their jobs following a night of protest over Netanyahu's failure to negotiate a deal for the release of those held in Gaza. All this after the recovery of the bodies of 6 more hostages. Across Israel overnight, hundreds of thousands took to the streets in the biggest protest since the war began almost 11 months ago. In Tel Aviv, police and protesters clashed. Nationwide, some 24 people were arrested. Today, protesters blocked a main road in the city, demanding that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu reach a deal to return the 100 or so Israeli hostages still in Gaza.
I think we have a criminal government who lets the hostages be murdered only for the sake of the coalition. And we have a prime minister who doesn't think of the good of the country but only of his own good.
A general strike disrupted flights at Israel's international airport, and some hospitals were only partially operating. In Jerusalem, Israelis lined the streets for the funeral procession of American-Israeli hostage Hersh Goldberg Poland. He was among the 6 hostages recovered by Israeli forces in Gaza over the weekend. Today, Netanyahu said Hamas would pay a heavy price for their deaths. At the funeral, Goldberg Poland's mother, Rachel, mourned her son.
For 23 years, I was privileged to have the most stunning honor to be Hersh's mama. I'll take it and say thank you. I just wish it had been for longer.
At the White House, President Biden added to the pressure on Netanyahu.
Mr. President, do you think it's time for Prime Minister Netanyahu to do more on this issue? Do you think he's doing enough?
No.
In Gaza, a polio vaccination campaign continued. Israel and Hamas have agreed to pause fighting in select areas until Tuesday. The goal is to vaccinate more than 600,000 children.
In these conditions we live in, with the diseases spreading among children, vaccination is now very important to protect our children. God willing, in these days of war, peace will prevail for everyone.
And in the West Bank city of Jenin, an Israeli military operation continued. The 5th day of heavy fighting. So far, at least 20 Palestinians have been killed. At the White House today, President Biden said the United States will hold Hamas leaders accountable for American-Israeli Hersh Goldberg Poland's death. He also met with the U.S. team trying to reach an agreement that would free the remaining hostages. Yohanan Plesner is president of the Israel Democracy Institute. He is a former aide to both Prime Ministers Ariel Sharon and Benjamin Netanyahu. Mr. Plesner, give us a sense of what the mood is like in Israel today. You've had a tumultuous 36 hours.
Yeah, it's a very emotional period. The fact that 6 of our hostages have been murdered in cold blood, and just 24 hours before the IDF soldiers have actually reached them, was received as a major blow for, I think, for all Israelis, and the protests that erupted have reflected that. Now we have to understand we have to be able to hold 2 complex thoughts at the same time. On the one hand, we're dealing with a murderous Hamas jihadist regime that wanted and continues to desire to annihilate our state and to execute our hostages. And they haven't said yes to any deal, to any mediation, to any of the parameters. So Israelis are, in this respect, united behind the war goals of dismantling Hamas and bringing back the hostages. At the same time, a growing number of Israelis, perhaps a majority of Israelis, do not trust the way the Prime Minister is conducting and carrying out this war and operation, and specifically the attempt to bring back the hostages. And the protests yesterday are a reflection of this distrust in the way the Prime Minister is leading the negotiation.
Well, that distrust you talk about, you worked for Mr. Netanyahu. What do you think his thinking is right now about this, getting the hostages back?
Well, the Prime Minister basically conveyed to the Israeli public the message that only increased military pressure will bring back the hostages. Now, on the one hand, increasing the military pressure puts obviously pressure on Hamas and its leadership and produces a positive outcome, but it also has costs. It also puts our hostages in danger. And what we've seen now is the fact that our hostages were murdered was to some extent as a result of the fact that we put pressure. So this formula is not that simple as it sounds. But I think a more complex element is the fact that many Israelis think that Mr. Netanyahu is managing this negotiation in bad faith, that alongside the interest of bringing back the hostages and dismantling Hamas, there's also other additional political interests like keeping together his coalition, and that it costs with hostages' lives. And this distrust, I would say, was augmented by the fact that at least what we heard from leaks, from what's happening within the room, within the discussion, within the discussions, is that the leaders of the defense establishment think that there's additional wiggle room for Israeli compromises that might bring about a deal, and that Netanyahu insists on not making those compromises. And it's unclear whether there's strictly a security consideration or other more political considerations involved.
This growing distrust, does it present a challenge or a threat to Mr. Netanyahu and his government?
Not necessarily, because we've seen tonight Mr. Netanyahu presenting his case and positioning it strictly as a security argument about the merit of holding on to the border between Gaza and Egypt. And as long as it's wrapped as or positioned as a security argument around security interests, I think it's a relatively comfortable position for the Prime Minister.
The Prime Minister tonight said that the containing that or maintaining presence on that border, what they call the Philadelphia corridor, is the only way to keep Israel safe against weapons being smuggled in from Egypt. Does his defense establishment agree with him?
No, not necessarily. We actually heard the chief of staff of the IDF say that Israel can also give up on its on holding on to this corridor temporarily, or think of other arrangements. For example, if we get security guarantees from the United States and the Egyptians, and one has to see it in a broader context. This is a whole issue of risk management. There are the lives of the hostages. There's what's happening in the northern border. There's the interest in building and stabilizing a strong coalition against Iran that is trying to dominate the region, to deploy and activate its proxies against Israel, against U.S. interests, against the interests of the moderate countries in the region. So there's a much broader picture than just narrowing and reducing it down to a dispute around one axis. So I think to reduce the whole debate into what's going to happen in this 5-kilometer strip is less about security interests and more about talking to one's own political base. So again, Israel's war goals are just. We're fighting against an evil enemy, Hamas, that wants to annihilate us. And at the same time, the fact that we have a just war does not mean necessarily that the prime minister is executing it in an optimal manner, not vis-a-vis our own national interests and not vis-a-vis the interests of some of our allies.
Yohanan Plesner, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
There is other news. In Ukraine, residents of Kyiv awoke to the aftermath of Russian shelling that wounded 3 people. It also cast a shadow on what was supposed to be the first day of the school year. This morning, parents took their children to one school, only to find buildings destroyed and classes canceled.
We heard strong explosions since the morning. We live not far from here. We hid in the bathroom where it was relatively safe. She is going to this school for the first time. It is a new school for her. And so we came and saw this. At first, we did not see messages that our studies were being postponed, so we came with our neighbors. The children were hoping for a celebration today.
Explosions rocked Russia's Belgorod region just across the border from Ukraine. The governor there blamed Ukraine for the shelling, which injured 1 person and damaged several homes. The U.S. government has seized a private plane used by Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro. The Justice Department says the $13 million jet was smuggled from Florida last year in violation of sanctions and export control laws. In a statement, the Commerce Department, which partnered with DOJ, said this sends a message that aircraft illegally acquired from the United States for the benefit of sanctioned Venezuelan officials cannot just fly off into the sunset. The seizure comes just over a month since Venezuela's contested presidential election. The U.S. says Maduro lost to his opponent, Edmundo Gonzalez. Police in Chicago say a shooting on a subway train early Monday has left 4 people dead. 3 people died at the scene at an above-ground station in the western suburb of Forest Park. A 4th victim died later at a hospital. Officials say a suspect initially fled but was arrested on a train on a different line, and a weapon was recovered. They described it as an isolated incident. An investigation is ongoing. More than 10,000 hotel workers across the country are spending this Labor Day on strike. They're calling for higher pay and more even workloads. Hundreds of hospitality workers at a Hilton in Baltimore were the latest to join the growing walkout. There are nearly 200,000 fewer hotel workers now than there were before the pandemic. The union wants staffing levels restored and wages increased.
We have a lot of people that are just living check to check. We're asking for a $10 raise, and even with that $10 raise that we're asking for in the next 4 years, by inflation numbers, we would still be considered poor as a hotel worker in the next 4 years. So we're asking for a contract that is a modest contract.
Union President Gwen Mills says the strikes are part of a long-running battle over benefits in an industry that's disproportionately made up of women and people of color. Representatives from Hyatt and Hilton say they're open to negotiations. At the Paralympic Games in Paris, Team USA's lineup of para-triathletes won a combined 8 medals today. Among them, veteran Haley Dans, who struck gold after finishing second in both the Rio Games in 2016 and Tokyo the last time around. On the track, a Paralympic debut for Ezra Freck turned into a golden finish in his classification of the 100-meter dash. Americans also won medals today in swimming, badminton, and wheelchair rugby. And you may not know the name, but you've probably read one of her stories. Longtime Associated Press reporter Linda Deutsch has died. For nearly 50 years, she covered some of the biggest criminal and civil trials in America. She was in the courtroom for proceedings against cult leader Charles Manson and Unabomber Ted Kaczynski, against Michael Jackson and O.J. Simpson. Trials, she once said, are human drama.
Oh, you cover all these grisly, horrible things. She said, don't you feel like a voyeur? Do you feel like a voyeur when you're watching Hamlet or Macbeth? It's the same thing. And it's as old as Shakespeare and as old as Socrates, and it's an extremely powerful theater.
Linda Deutsch was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer in 2022. She was 80 years old. Still to come on the NewsHour, our Politics Monday duo weighs in on presidential candidates' efforts to woo union voters. And a new book chronicles the precipitous downfall of former lawyer turned convicted murderer Alec Murdaugh.
This is the PBS NewsHour from WETA Studios in Washington and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
Candidates are heading into the campaign season's closing stretch that traditionally kicks off on Labor Day. Former President Donald Trump was off the trail today and over the weekend, but on the offensive online. He'll speak to the Fraternal Order of Police later this week. Meanwhile, labor was the theme for Democrats with several events in blue wall states. Vice President Kamala Harris and President Biden made their first joint campaign appearance since the convention before an organized labor audience in Pittsburgh. Earlier, Harris also made a pitch for unions in Detroit.
Everywhere I go, I tell people, look, you may not be a union member. You better thank a union member for the 5-day work week. You better thank a union member for sick leave. You better thank a union member for paid leave. What we know is when union wages go up, everybody's wages go up.
The candidates are fighting to win key Midwestern states like Michigan, where Harris was today and where Trump was just a few days ago. Both are determined to get as much of the union vote there as they can. But as our economics correspondent Paul Salmon reports, Trump has also shown surprising strength among some workers.
I remember my mom crying for days when John F. Kennedy was assassinated.
Retired United Auto Workers member Brian Panabecker. So yours was a Democratic family?
Yep, because we were always told, well, the Democrats are for the little guy, the working man.
But he's an avid Donald Trump supporter now, one of many who like Trump's positions on trade, tariffs, and taking on China.
I put 30 auto workers into a group called Auto Workers for Trump on Facebook. It grew organically to 3,800 people.
Please welcome the president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters.
As for the much larger Teamsters Union, its president, Sean O'Brien, actually spoke on day one of the Republican National Convention, although he didn't endorse Donald Trump.
We all know how Washington is run. Working people have no chance of winning this fight. That's why I'm here today, because I refuse to keep doing the same things my predecessors did.
And so the question, is the union vote, so long thought to be faithfully Democrat, swinging Republican? Brian Panabecker lives just outside True Blue Detroit, holds his political truths to be self-evident.
I just believe that the Republicans now, with their lower taxes and support of family values, is better for the average working men and women of this country than the Democrat.
At a Teamsters local of oil refinery workers near Detroit, we heard much of the same.
Of course, we're going to try to elect somebody that's going to be more pro-oil, right? Drill, baby, drill.
Refinery worker, drill, baby, drill.
I am a refinery worker, yes. I am all for keeping my job. I'm all for America being self-sufficient on energy, our reserves being topped off to the top. I'm all for us being independent. So yes.
But more important to Bill Kirkland, cancel culture.
If you don't agree with me, you're on the other side of the line. We hate your guts.
The Teamsters have always been the more Republican-leaning union.
Longtime Detroit journalist Mickey Maynard.
And it goes back to Nixon, because Nixon pardoned Jimmy Hoffa. And the members of the Teamsters Union remembered that.
The Teamsters also supported Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. And even auto workers began defecting in Macomb County, a northern suburb of Detroit, back in 1980, the Reagan Democrats, as imports undercut the U.S. auto industry. Brian Panabecker lives in Macomb, blames Democrats for the decline.
Do you remember a presidential candidate named Ross Perot? And he said, if we elect Bill Clinton at that time and NAFTA is signed into law, you'll hear a giant sucking sound. And that'll be all of our jobs leaving and going to Mexico. Well, in essence, that's exactly what did happen.
What many blue-collar workers think today, says Mickey Maynard.
There is this idea that you used to be able to drive a truck or work in a car plant, and you can own a home and maybe even own a vacation home and send your kids to college and have 2 cars and retire comfortably. And that today, it doesn't exist in the way that it once did. A lot of people have to work 2 and even 3 jobs to attain the level that one parent had back in those days.
As some UAW parents made it into the middle class, they moved to the suburbs, to places like Macomb County, became tax-cutting Republicans. But there's plenty of union support for the Harris-Walz ticket, which supports stronger union rights, collective bargaining, and tougher enforcement of it. Walter Robinson said his co-workers were happy that Harris and Walz visited his local.
We stand for the people, and we stand for the dignity of work.
Do you think more people will show up and vote now because of her?
I believe so.
Walter Robinson Jr., a member of the local, works as a quality control inspector at the Ford plant across the street.
And I believe that you'll get other people that might have been on the fence because they were concerned about whether President Biden couldn't take another 4 years. And I believe that they will say, well, this is a younger candidate, so let's go.
Now look, plenty of Teamsters support the Democrats too.
I would never vote for a Republican.
In fact, even this group of refinery workers whose jobs depend on fossil fuels was split right down the middle. And most unions support Harris-Walz wholeheartedly, like the Service Employees International, 2 million members, the National Education Association, 3 million, the AFL-CIO itself, 12.5 million. And at the Democratic Convention, UAW President Shawn Fain made his support crystal clear.
In 2024, who will stand with the working class in our fight for justice? Kamala Harris.
Okay, so what percentage of the UAW's 400,000 or so members favored Donald Trump?
70%. That's conservative.
Walter Robinson's guess, more like 40%. Journalist Mickey Maynard?
I would come down somewhere in the middle.
Final question about the weeks remaining till the election. Anybody think they're going to change their mind?
No.
No.
Not with this group of people.
What do you mean?
No, we know what we want.
I put it this way to the UAW's Walter Robinson.
Is there anything that Kamala Harris could do that would change the minds of some of the people on the line?
She probably could pull out a magic wand or something, but then they'll call her a witch.
Robinson then laughed, maybe nervously.
That's the thing that I had to worry about doing all these interviews is that MAGA's gonna find out where I live at and they're gonna be on my front lawn messing with me.
Because, as you may have noticed, these days, tribalism runs pretty deep in America. For the PBS NewsHour, Paul Salman in and around Detroit.
And for more on both presidential campaigns' efforts to appeal to working class voters, we're joined by our Politics Monday duo. That's Amy Walter of the Cook Political Report with Amy Walter and Tamara Keith of NPR. As we just heard, the endorsements from a union don't necessarily mean that the union members are going to go that way. But Tam, how is the Harris campaign trying to turn all those endorsements into votes?
It's pretty simple. Those endorsements come with what we would call a ground game. That is union members out knocking on doors, campaigning with their family members, campaigning with their neighbors. And for instance, the AFL-CIO endorsed Biden back then extremely early, very, very early. And when I talked to them about why they did that, they said because that then opens the floodgates to be able to begin doing that door knocking and other on the ground campaign work. It really just, for Democrats, magnifies their already existing infrastructure to try to reach voters where they are, because the feeling about this election is it will be very close. It will be decided in key states where there are a lot of union members. And yes, the union members, the rank and file, are split. But in terms of who's knocking on doors, they're knocking on doors for Democrats.
And we also just heard how Trump has a lot of support among union members. How is he making those inroads?
It's, in a lot of ways, it's cultural. He is appealing to these voters. He appeals to a lot of working class voters. He is appealing to them, in the same way that he's appealing to a lot of voters across a swath of the country. What he is doing is saying that he is for the workers. He is trying to drive a wedge, in fact, between the workers and their union in many cases, particularly with the auto workers. I'm not sure how well that's actually working. Certainly, the union leadership will point out that when he was president, he appointed members of the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board, that were not pro-union at all. But he is sort of trying to say that he's pro-worker. And it works with some voters, certainly.
And Amy, the Democrats chose to have their union events in Pennsylvania and Michigan. Any coincidence?
What a coincidence. I have no idea why they would choose those two states. And that Harris was with the president in Pittsburgh, a state where, obviously, he is from, the president from Scranton, from the other part of the state, but hoping that there's maybe an ability for Biden to convey some of that goodwill among those types of voters. And I think, both the setup piece here and Tam's point about cultural, that when we talk about labor unions, as a whole, it is about 18% of the national electorate. So it's not a huge percentage of the electorate, people who say, I am in a labor household. But when you talk about people who feel like they're defined by, not necessarily that they belong to a union, but consider themselves to be working class. And this is where I think Trump has done a good job of getting beyond just the cultural attachment, but he's talking to them about workers, particularly putting workers first, specifically in a place like Michigan. Hey, those electric battery mandates and electric car mandates? We don't like them. You don't like them. Going to get rid of them. We're going to put tariffs on cars coming from overseas. That's going to help your job. We're not going to let the country get flooded with those foreign cars anymore. And then we were at the RNC, and the head of the Teamsters was speaking. This is not something we thought we'd ever see at a Republican convention. So,
though he didn't endorse.
He did not endorse.
This weird dance.
But just having the head of the Teamsters speaking at a Republican convention is sending a message beyond just labor, people who are part of a labor union, but to those people who identify themselves as part of that sort of forgotten working class voter.
Last week, the unpredictable Donald Trump surprised a lot of folks by coming out and saying that in vitro fertilization, IVF, should be free. Either the insurance companies should pay for it or the government should pay for it. That sent a lot of Republicans scrambling to try to figure out how to deal with this issue. We've got two Republican senators, who each came down on the other side, opposite sides of this issue over this weekend.
I think we'd have to evaluate the fiscal impact, whether the taxpayer can afford to pay for this, what impact it would have on premiums. But in principle, supporting couples who are trying to use IVF or other fertility treatments, I don't think is something that's controversial at all.
I think he's just trying to show his support for IVF treatments that, we've been accused, the party has, of being a bit against birth control. We're not.
But you wouldn't support this idea of mandating insurance companies to cover this, would you?
No.
I mean, you've already voted against it.
Because there's no end to that. Yeah, there's no end to that.
Amy, the Democrats are clearly making reproductive rights an issue in this campaign. Have the Republicans figured out how to deal with it, how to react to it?
No, because it is not an issue that they had expected they were going to have to deal with in 2022, and there's no easy answer for it in 2024. The difference, though, between, say, somebody like Lindsey Graham there, who was trying to fit this conversation about IVF and abortion into the traditional Republican box, that's not where Donald Trump is, right? There's not a philosophical, ideological issue that Trump is grappling with. What he sees is, wow, I'm not doing very well with women. How can I get women voters back? And so you saw him the other day try to get a little bit further away from Republicans on the issue of abortion, specifically the 6-week abortion ban in Florida. Then he sort of had to backtrack a little bit on that because that made pro-life voters and supporters very upset. But IVF, here's another way that he sees this as an opportunity to really win over voters he needs to win over. It's not a change in philosophy or ideology. That's where the party gets itself sort of caught up in this issue because they're trying to fit it into something that's bigger than just one election. That's not where Donald Trump is.
And Tam, tomorrow the Democrats are kicking off what they call the Reproductive Freedom Bus Tour, and they're doing it in Trump's backyard in Palm Beach, Florida. Has the Harris campaign reacted to Donald Trump's comments on IVF?
They have, and they essentially said, "Why would you believe him now?" Because he has changed his position on reproductive rights, on IVF, on any number of things repeatedly, though he has been very clear that he, and they will point this out repeatedly, Trump has been pretty clear that he's responsible for Roe being overturned because he appointed those 3 Supreme Court justices who created the conservative supermajority, and he points that out whenever he's in front of a conservative group or a religious right group. So he wants that, he wants credit, but he doesn't want too much credit, and he doesn't want the political problem that doing away with Roe has created. Even with IVF, when an Alabama court put IVF on hold, it was because of the Supreme Court decision overturning Roe. So this is a problem of his creating. This is the dog caught the car, and this is the political challenge that he's trying to sort through, and he's doing it in a very Trumpy way, which is he just says, I believe this, I believe that. Oh, wait, no, somebody said that I should not say that I would possibly maybe support that Florida ballot measure. So no, I'm going to vote against it. He had multiple positions last week, and I think we can see more of that to come.
It's been a week since Mr. Trump made his controversial visit to Arlington National Cemetery. We're still talking about it. Vice President Harris was silent, and then finally issued put up on social media this past weekend. Let me be clear: the former president disrespected sacred ground, all for the sake of a political stunt. This is a man who is unable to comprehend anything other than service to himself. And the Trump campaign reacted by putting out statements from Gold Star families. This sort of feeds in, doesn't it, Tam, to the Democrats' line about Donald Trump?
Certainly, this was an event that has been snowballed. It started out with Trump being invited by these families, but then there was video and there was photos, and they and someone on his staff pushed back someone who worked at the cemetery who said the rules say you can't film in Section 60. They did. They put out a video. He didn't apologize. And now we are like multiple days into this cycle of Trump controversy, which now has muddied the water, and he is making it about Harris, when in the start it was him who didn't apologize.
We've got to leave it there because we're out of time. Tammy and Am.
Tammy, there you go.
There you go. We have a new,
Amy
new
and
moniker.
Tam. Right. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thanks, John.
A new chapter is unfolding in a story of power, privilege, and violence. Last year, Alec Murdaugh was convicted of murdering his wife and son in South Carolina. The case gripped many across the country, and now the state Supreme Court has agreed to hear his appeal. A new book chronicles not only the story of the murders and the trial, but a family that for a century used violence to gain power. Lisa Desjardins has more, beginning with a reminder of Murdaugh's tangled history.
Did you kill your wife and son?
In a small courthouse with millions of people watching, last March a jury convicted formerly powerful attorney Alec Murdaugh of the unthinkable, shooting and killing his wife and younger son, Paul. Prosecutors say it was a desperate attempt by Murdaugh to distract as years of stealing millions from his clients was coming to light. Lead prosecutor Creighton Waters.
It doesn't matter who your family is. It doesn't matter how much money you have or people think you have. It doesn't matter what you think, how prominent you are. If you do wrong, if you break the law, if you murder, then justice will be done in South Carolina.
The trial raised the specter of other deaths around Murdaugh and his immediate family, the fatal head injury attributed to a fall of their housekeeper 5 years earlier, the death of 19-year-old Mallory Beach after witnesses say Paul Murdaugh drunkenly crashed his boat, and the death of a teenage classmate of Murdaugh's older son, ruled a hit and run, but which police later investigated as a homicide. The Murdaughs publicly denied responsibility for any of that. On the stand in his wife and son's murder case, Alec had to admit he lied to police after cell phone video proved he was at the scene of the crime minutes before the deaths. In a separate case, Murdaugh admitted guilt to financial crimes, stealing life-changing legal settlement money from impoverished clients. He blamed drug addiction. The isolated Murdaugh estate where the family murders happened has been sold, but what happened there is still making headlines. A new book chronicles this saga and goes further, looking at not just Alec Murdaugh, but 100 years of eye-popping privilege and violence connected with his father, grandfather, and great-grandfather. The book is The Devil at His Elbow, Alec Murdaugh and the Fall of a Southern Dynasty by Wall Street Journal reporter Valerie Borline. She joins me now. Congratulations, you're an instant bestseller.
Thank you.
There are a lot of true crime stories these days. What about this one made you want to write a book?
I was captivated by the same thing that the country was captivated by, right? I mean, this story had everything. It had all 7 of the deadly sins. I went and looked them up, and I was like, yep, it does. It had mystery, who killed Maggie and Paul, and then once we found out that Alec was charged, why and how? How could a man kill his wife and son? And I think as much as anything for me, I grew up in the South. I've covered the South my entire career. It's really the only place in the country that just evokes an image in your mind. And once I started digging in on the history, I was like, wow, you can tell the story of the rural South through the lens of this family, in addition to every other thing it shows us about, American life and American tragedy.
I want to have you read a passage about Alec Murdaugh in chapter 4. Can you read how you describe him there?
He was the kind of guy who could, in the course of a day, score some pills, cheat on his long-suffering wife, fix 3 different court cases in 3 different counties, head to Hampton's Little League fields to catch one of his son's teams, and then host the after party for players' families.
Now, this is the same man who spent years embezzling millions, committing massive fraud, in fact, and he lied to the police on the night of his wife and son's murders, yet he took the defense stand. In the end, how did you come to understand this man? And is he someone who understands the truth himself?
I think he gave us 2 days of who he was when he took the stand in his homicide case. But I think he also, in addition, talked an additional 45 minutes uninterrupted back in November in Beaufort when he was finally sentenced for stealing millions of dollars. I watched him. I can remember putting my pencil down and just leaning forward and being like, he doesn't know himself. He was a walking mirage, and nobody really knew him.
Do you think he's someone who believes he's above the law?
There's no question in my mind that Alec Murdaugh thinks he's above the law. And I think that is an inherited belief. The story of the book is really the story of 5 generations, essentially, of Murdaughs. They realized that to be above the law, you had to become the law. And they were the law. Alec's father, his grandfather, and his great-grandfather all held the office of solicitor, which is, district attorney, but it's so much more than that in a rural area. They were the lead lawman for a 5-county area for a century, and in a place where there would be maybe a sheriff, a deputy sheriff, and a jailer, but that was it. The Murdaughs were the finder of fact. They were the detectives. They were the law.
That's incredible power. And going through that, his great-grandfather, through your incredible research over years, great-grandfather committed suicide in insurance fraud scheme that led to the family's wealth. Grandfather ran a bootlegging operation.
The largest in the South.
And got away with it, it looks like, with jury tampering while he was a prosecutor, by the way. His own father, there's evidence that he covered up a violent boat crash. I want to ask you the theme of this book. What did you learn about this family and power and deceit, how they tell lies and get away with it?
What I learned about this family is that they had perfected the art of making a lie look like a truth. And for a long time, that was easy enough to do when you are the law. There was no electronic records. There were not cameras following us at all times. And if you say, no, that never happened, or in the case of his grandfather, who was accused of running the largest bootlegging ring in the South by the DOJ, by the Department of Justice, he was like, I never took a cash bribe out in the hallway of the Colleton County Courthouse, the one where we were every day in court. So they just had mastered the art of making problems go away, and they could because of generational privilege.
And generational wealth that they passed on through
generational wealth. It was a dynasty forged in fraud. I think the evidence completely supports that.
What do you think this tells you about this particular place in the South?
It really is so isolated and so poor. The median family income is half the national average. There's no net migration, right? Nobody moves in, nobody moves out. It's been 20,000 people for 100 years. So it really has been immune to change, partly because of the iron fist of this family. One of the perverse legacies of the Murdochs was they were the solicitors, right? But they also ran this very powerful civil law firm. And because they knew everybody, guess what? The jury awards in civil cases were enormous. And that had the perverse impact of scaring businesses away. So all that is to say the economy is not vibrant at all. There are many people that I've come to really care about in Hampton, and they have been left with a hard situation as a result.
This story is something, obviously, that a lot of people paid attention to for the details. But I also want to talk about Murdoch's victims. You spent time talking with them. Some of the poorest of the poor who he stealed from. What is the takeaway for them?
I really thank you for saying that. I really did try to let you know a lot more about the poorest and most vulnerable people that he stole from. Motherless girls, a quadriplegic deaf teenager. He stole their future. He stole their money, but he stole their chance at a life. And what I wanted to show was there's a kind of moral and emotional violence to that type of crime. And I think over the course of years, that violence inured him to hurting other people. So it was not, in my mind, as far a leap to kill his wife and son to cover up, as the evidence shows, to cover up his many years of thieving.
Comes back to that circle of power and deceit.
It really does.
He is appealing, trying to appeal still.
Oh, he's appealing multiple things, isn't he?
Do you think this case will ever end?
We have a first ending. A jury of his peers in the place where he grew up found him guilty of killing his wife and son, and then later he pled guilty in state court to all the thefts. So essentially he pled guilty to the motive. He pled guilty to the predicate crimes that the state said drove him to kill them. No matter what happens in the future, we have an ending, and we also know he will spend the rest of his life in prison.
No one knows this case better. Valerie Borlein, a gripping and meaningful book. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
We'll be back in a bit with a look at how Democratic vice presidential nominee Tim Walz has become a focal point at the Minnesota State Fair. But first, take a moment to hear from your local PBS station. It's a chance to offer your support, which helps keep programs like ours on the air. For those stations staying with us, we return to a cooking icon. Mater Jaffrey first made Indian cuisine accessible to the West decades ago with her milestone cookbook, An Invitation to Indian Cooking. In this encore presentation, she spoke with Amna Nawaz from her home in New York as part of our Arts and Culture series, Canvas.
I'm Mathur Jaffrey. In the crowded, cosmopolitan world of cuisine, she has single name status.
Madhur Jaffrey.
Madhur Jaffrey.
Madhur Jaffrey.
And we're talking about Madhur Jaffrey. But for famed Indian chef Madhur Jaffrey, the path to numerous best-selling cookbooks, multiple James Beard Awards, and the highest civilian honors in both India and the United Kingdom wasn't planned.
I think of it as a huge, wonderful accident. And I've enjoyed myself hugely while it happened.
Ironically, growing up in North India, Madhur Jaffrey didn't spend much time in the kitchen.
I did everything the boys did. I played with them, I played cricket, I went fishing, I went swimming in the river behind our house.
An aspiring actress, she left home in Delhi for London's Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts in 1958 at the age of 19. Far from home, what she missed most was her mother's cooking.
We used to go up 5 floors of steps to the canteen, and then we would get this, grey slice of roast beef that you could hardly look at. And I would think, oh my God, the food at home is so good. Why am I eating this? So what I did was, rather than just give up and eat that rubbishy food, I wrote to my mother and I said, look, I don't know how to cook, but can you teach me? Can you send me letters with recipes?
Her mother obliged, and the transcontinental cooking classes began.
She didn't write very long, elaborate recipes. She wrote 3-line recipes. Take this, take that, stir that around, add a little water, and let it cook till it's done.
There's no measurements or anything in the recipes.
No real measurements, just a little bit of this and a little bit of that. But what was the wonderful thing that I realized much, much later was that I had a memory of the taste of everything I'd eaten.
As she pursued a performing career years later in New York, strangers would ask again and again, where could they find good Indian food?
So I started writing recipes and giving them out to people, and it just sort of mushroomed and grew.
In April of 1973, it bloomed into her seminal cookbook, An Invitation to Indian Cooking, reissued 50 years later, a collection of the recipes for the dals, chutneys, keemas, and biryanis that defined her youth and kept her connected to home. It wasn't the first Indian cookbook on the market in America, but it was the one that caught on. Madhur's straightforward, simple style, adapted from her mother's letters, offered unfamiliar Western chefs, newly intrigued by Indian cuisine, an easy entry.
Now what I have here...
The book made Madhur a household name in America and the UK. A cooking show on the BBC followed in 1982, combining her love of food and performing.
If you want the dish to be hotter, you can really put in as much cayenne as you like.
She recalled auditioning in a studio with no kitchen, no utensils, and no food.
And then I'm saying, I'm peeling a cucumber and I'm grating it, grate, right into the yogurt. I mix it in. Now I clean off the edges and put a little ground cumin on top. It'll look lovely. A little ground Kashmiri chili powder on top because it'll look very pretty. And there it is. There is your yogurt raita. So I did it that way. And I got a job.
She produced best-selling cookbook after cookbook over the years, welcoming home cooks more deeply into the food she loved.
Chickpeas.
For a generation of South Asians inspired to build new lives abroad in the 1960s and 70s, the book offered more than just recipes. It offered a connection to the home left behind, including from my own mother, Seema.
I wanted to share something with you, if you don't mind. My mother's copy of An Invitation to Indian Cooking.
Oh my goodness.
Has been used and reused so lovingly for so many years. It's kept in a bag because the cover fell off.
Oh my goodness, that's the best.
I mean, this is a well-worn, truly, truly loved book. And so my father said, you can't use this one anymore. He got her another copy.
Karim, do you know how to peel ginger? It's always good just to scrape it like that.
I keep telling people when they're cooking, where's the emotional aspect of it? Because Indians and Pakistanis and Bangladeshis, there's a lot of emotion tied to our food. And it has to do with brothers, sisters, ancestors, cousins. eating together, going on picnics together, all those memories are tied into every little bit of food.
Look at that, see?
Oh, that's so delicious.
Now it's coming, see?
So I got letters from the children. My parents used to cook from your cookbook. And now, and we ate your food. So now we are cooking from that.
All the spices hit the pan.
And there have been 3 generations like that who've actually cooked from the book already and passed it on to their children. It's very gratifying. It's very nice to know that several generations within the same family have been cooking my recipes in America.
Cheers.
Those families now await Mather's next book, the details of which she's holding close for the moment.
I won't tell you too much about it, but it's great fun for me.
Is it another cookbook or not?
It is. It is. But it's a kind of fun cookbook for me that includes aspects of me that you don't know. You'll find out.
Now I'm intrigued.
That's what I meant to do, and I'll leave it at that.
The happy accident that inspired this journey is still propelling the now 90-year-old Mather Jaffrey down new paths ahead.
The Minnesota State Fair draws more daily visitors than any other state fair in the nation. Over the years, there's been a long tradition of politics being on display. It's where Teddy Roosevelt uttered the famous phrase, "Speak softly and carry a big stick." This year, politics is back at center stage. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz took time off the vice presidential campaign to visit yesterday. And as Twin Cities PBS reporter Mary LaHammer reports, he has been top of mind for fairgoers.
The buzz at the booth where Democrats gather is decidedly different this year.
I got the Harris Walls. It was the orange. I wanted the green, but you know what? I'll just wait until I can get that one too.
Why is this your pick? Why do you like it?
Why do I like it? It's kind of the anti-MAGA hat.
The Minnesota State Fair always features politics, but seeing a local elevated to a national ticket has changed things for folks in the Democratic Farmer-Labor Party, or DFL for short. It's the state affiliate of the National Democratic Party.
We're super excited about the Walz-Harris ticket, and we got to stop by and buy some stuff, show our support, and make sure the right people get elected.
With Tim Walz, I mean, I'm sad because we'll lose Tim Walz, but he is the kind of guy that you just want to endorse and be behind because he is a father figure, he's a teacher.
Here at the DFL booth at the Minnesota State Fair, they sold more merchandise in the first few days than they've ever done before in an entire run of the fair.
People are excited, and people are excited. Yes, Democrats are excited, but I've been here a number of times. We've had Republicans, independents, people that don't want to go back.
Senator Klobuchar, who ran for president in the past, says it was surreal to stand backstage with Oprah, John Legend, and the Mankato football team before introducing Walz at the convention.
In Minnesota, we love a dad in plaid.
How many times have you been asked, what is Tim Walz really like?
A few times, but actually one of the funnier things about our modern politics is I think all these people across the country now think they know him personally. They think he's like their favorite uncle or something.
The Republican Party booth also has new merch, poking fun at Vice President Harris, and the Never Walz booth has updated images for the VP run, mocking his military record and menstrual products in school bathrooms, along with spinning a wheel full of issues from Action for Liberty.
Stolen valor. Claims he went to battle. Never did.
One GOP state rep spends his time at the nonpartisan House booth.
You walk past the DFL booth, you get the buzz and the energy that's around having Governor Walz. How do Republicans kind of counter that energy around Walz and that ticket now?
I think that story is going to unfold. I believe that the governor hasn't really been held to account for a lot of the decisions that he's made. The governor is really good at communicating with people. I don't agree with a lot of the policies that have come out of that, and I don't think that he's really been all that honest with with his belief system.
The Republican from a competitive district worked on the campaigns of Walz's last two challengers for governor and says he barely recognizes the kind of energy the vice presidential candidate has been mustering in front of enormous crowds on a national stage.
I've seen him change his demeanor significantly over the last 3 to 4 weeks.
As a person who, represents some rural areas, how do you feel about him and his outreach in rural Minnesota and the country?
Yeah, I think he's got a lot of work to do on being, a little bit more authentic. Putting an orange vest on and putting a camo hat on and talking about it is one thing. But, when the policies are hurting hunters, when the policies hurt fishermen.
Do Republicans have a lot of work to do, though, to successfully counter what has become a sensation and the memes and his communication skills?
Absolutely. I mean, Republicans, we need to talk more about what we believe in and what does it mean to be a Republican in Minnesota. President Trump is very popular in greater Minnesota. But President Trump is not all that popular in the metro. I mean, we have to find that space as well and that grace.
The Minnesota State Fair ends today, giving people one last night to pick up campaign merchandise as the campaign enters the final stretch. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Mary LaHammer in St. Paul, Minnesota.
And that is the NewsHour for this Monday. I'm John Yang. For all of us here at the PBS NewsHour, thanks for joining us. Happy Labor Day.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by...
On an American Cruise Line's journey, travelers experience the maritime heritage and culture of the Maine coast and New England islands. Our fleet of small cruise ships explore American landscapes, seaside villages, and historic harbors, where you can experience local customs and cuisine. American Cruise Lines, proud sponsor of PBS NewsHour.
Supported by the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, committed to building a more just, verdant, and peaceful world. More information at macfound.org. And with the ongoing support of these institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.